Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Regan, and I am a relationship expert and coach. I'm also a certified mediator and seasoned family therapist in the Bay Area. And I'm here today to talk to Holly Forman-Patel about parenting, co-parenting kids during this pandemic. So welcome, Holly. I'm so happy to have you here to give us some tips about, and for us to have a discussion about how to parent kids, especially if you're separated during this pandemic. So thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Susan. I'm excited to be here.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and the work that you do in the Bay Area?
Hi, I'm Holly Forman-Patel, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I specialize in working with children and adults who've experienced trauma. And then I also specialize in doing parent coaching, which is helping parents of kids 10 and under work through challenging behaviors that are occurring.
Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you know this about Holly and I, but Holly was my intern many years ago. Should we say how many years that was? I'm not sure. I'm not sure of the count now.
So actually this April, which is now, is 10 years.
Mm-hmm. So Holly and I have known each other for 10 years, and she was one of those interns that really stood out. I had been running and founded an organization called Bay Area Children First, and it was in Berkeley and San Francisco, and Holly was one of my interns. And luckily for me, she became one of my esteemed colleagues, and she actually rents and still stays with me in my suite in Berkeley. And we've been able to have this amazing relationship of referring clients back and forth, which has been such a gratifying experience because you've really developed yourself. And I wanted you to tell people a little bit about how you've developed yourself. And also, I know you recently wrote a workbook for kids. So I just thought it would be great for you to just expound on that a little bit.
Okay, yeah. And so before I started working with Susan, I was actually a therapist at Head Start working with the 0 to 5. And then that's when I went over to Bay Area Children First, who specialized in working with kiddos. And then from there, I actually got trained in something called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And so now that's what I do a whole lot of. Susan and I, we've referred back and forth a lot. I refer a lot of my co-parenting cases to Susan because she's absolutely fantastic at holding people together who are having conflict and helping them do what's best for their children. And then Susan's often referred the children of the people she's working with to me. And so it's been a lovely back and forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so one of the things that we do well together is I help parents who are separating figure out how to create a plan so that they can see their separation as something that's going to actually allow their family to grow and evolve and not grow and evolve in the tension of their relationship. But oftentimes kids have a really hard time during that transition. And so kids going through a divorce sometimes need to have some help from another therapist, their own therapist, that they can really process some of their grief. And one of the things I think you and I were talking recently about how this whole idea of the pandemic and kids now being home with their parents a lot, especially parents who are co-parenting in different homes, is creating quite a bit of tension. And in our earlier conversation, we talked about like some of the kids are really liking it because they're kind of settled down and they're able to be at home and not rushing around. And some parents are really liking it, but it's also really challenging. So I wonder, the very first part of our talk is to just talk about the challenges of having your kids home. And what do you do with those challenges? How do you help your kids? And how do you parent?
Yeah, and so I've been working with a lot of families over the last few weeks that are having a real big struggle with this. And the two big topics I see that are coming up the most, which will not surprise you, but is screen time. A lot of parents are really worried about how much time kids are spending on the screens. And it's challenging because schoolwork is on screens. And so there's this hard balance of how do I trust that my child's going to actually be doing their schoolwork versus playing Fortnite. The other challenge is kids getting bored. Parents are putting a lot of limitations on screen time, and kids don't know what to do with themselves. And so I find those two big things are really the hardest. And so some recommendations I've been giving to parents is actually creating some schedules around when things should be done along with breaks. And so I find that also parents are building, I don't know if the right word's resentment, but they feel like, well, my kid's been in school for 8 hours a day. Why is doing 2 to 4 hours of homework so challenging? And sometimes they forget the developmental level that their kid's at. At school, a kid has a parent or a teacher with them all the time telling them what to do. The structure's set, there's expectations. At home, the same isn't there. And so I find if we break it up for our kids, and in between those breakups, get them really fun things to do, like giving them maybe 15 minutes of screen time, or coming and playing a game of cards with them can be really helpful.
Mm-hmm. So we have the challenge of parents trying to actually teach their kids. And I always find that one of the reasons why kids have a hard time learning from their parents is because there's such an emotional relationship and parents have different expectations. So I think you're right, is that parents don't realize that kids are with teachers in a structured environment all day or while they're learning a certain subject, right? So as parents, we might also be trying to work or do other things to keep the household running. And so we might have to be actually letting some of those things go or trying to manage those times better to have some structure with our kids and checking in with them more and being really realistic on what they can actually do and what they can actually handle on their own. When people are in like a co-parenting situation and they're in different households, you know, we all know that everybody has different parenting styles. There's probably like 1% of the parents I meet have similar parenting styles. But so it's really hard to coordinate that. And I think parents have to talk even more about how they're parenting and how they're schooling their kids and having like really realistic expectations. I remember hearing this one principal saying the best thing to do during this time is love and structure. So it's like trying to just have structure every day, have a routine, even a whiteboard that you write down everything that's going to happen and make it really empowering for the kid that they get to like check off that thing or choose what they're going to do in their break. And that's the love part, is like having it be not so stringent, but also fun. What do you think about that? Have you heard any other ideas that parents are doing to make it work better for them?
Yeah, another suggestion I've been giving is creating a master list of all the activities your child can do that doesn't involve screens. Mm-hmm. It's hard. We live in such a screen central world, and even parents. I'll see parents in like my waiting room with their kid, the kid sitting there to do, and the parents on their phone, right, doing something. And so it's so ingrained in our society that it's easy to forget what are the things we can do. And so being really creative around some of the activities your kids can do, and sometimes being more flexible. For example, a lot of times the thought of having your kids paint in the house makes parents, you know, want to run away. But instead of leaning back, I say lean forward, you know, set up a space that has a tarp where your kids can do fun, messy activities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's really a time of like stop and smell the roses, go back to basics and simple. I knew one of my parents was saying that they have a special treat at the end of the day. And the special treat is simple. It could be a dance party. It could be a bubble bath. It could be making cookies, like something super simple. And we can get back to simplicity during this time, which could be a gift for all of us to get used to spending different time together, like bring out some board games, write with your kids, read poetry, read books, those kinds of things, make a collage. So like all those like back to basic art craft projects that are in your closet, those are times to pull out.
And there's so many more activities to do that people aren't realizing. One of my favorites is Simon Says, where, you know, there's a Simon and they get to tell everyone what to do as long as it's safe, and then the other people do it. And this is a perfect way for kids to be able to control their parents in a positive, pro-social way. It's one of my favorite activities. You can do dance parties. You can do a co-art project together where you each paint together and create a really cool masterpiece. You can do puppet shows. Scavenger hunts are really, really fun. Kids love scavenger hunts. If parents can set this up, I gave a recommendation to family to hide a little special like chocolate treat for their kids somewhere in the house during the day and make it really hard so their kid has to go around and find that. You can play hide and seek either with your physical body or hiding objects. I mean, there's really so many activities you can do to bond and connect with your kids. And one of my other favorites is one that's not interactive. So there's two types of play. There's parallel play and interactive play. So interactive is, us back and forth, but parallels when we're side by side. So I've been really encouraging parents to, wherever their kids are doing their homework, like at the kitchen table, sit down with your kid, do your work, and then have your kid do their work side by side. And so you still feel like you're connected and together, but it's still separate.
Those are great ideas. Yeah. So this is good to think about, like the positive things that could happen in the households now that people are all in it together. And let's talk about a little bit about the tensions, because sometimes we might be coming across like kids might feel better, because they're hanging out at home and they don't have to rush around. Parents might be feeling really tense because of, financial insecurities, job insecurities, just plain old worries that their kids are going to get sick, or they're going to get sick, or someone in their life, in their families are going to get sick. So how are you helping parents with that? Or what are you seeing with your families around tension?
Yeah. So I think you named the financial piece is so challenging. The other piece is cabin fever, but not just on the kids' part, but also on parents' part. Like parents are having a hard time with this. And I'm seeing some depression happening with kids and parents. And it's really challenging as a parent to not only be stuck in your house and depressed, but then have some children that you need to respond to. And so those are, I find, like some of the trickiest pieces that are happening. And then with that, there is this calmness that's happening with kids because they're not at school for so many hours of the day and they're not getting as much homework. But with the calmness also comes some regression in behaviors because kids are actually stressed. And so I did a family session this week where the child shared with the parents that they're talking about COVID-19 too much and that it's really stressing the kids out. And something people don't understand, and this is especially with younger kids, is they'll hear a couple pieces of information and then they'll create a narrative that we're not aware of. And often that narrative isn't actually true. And so I'm finding either people are giving too much information, so kids have these huge, scary narratives, or they're giving not enough information. And so kids are creating different narratives. And I'll give an example. I did a family game night with my extended family this weekend, and my 8-year-old nephew heard that I was outside in my backyard, and he was like, "What, Auntie Holly, you can't go outside. You're going to get COVID-19. And I was like, "What?" And so because of what he's been hearing, he was associating just going outside with getting the virus. And so providing the appropriate, like developmentally appropriate amount of information around it, I find is really important.
So you bring up some really good points. I just want to reiterate them. And one is that sometimes adults deal with their stress differently. And some adults like talk about it all the time, talk about what they're stressed about. And then we have to, think about like as adults and even as like helping our kids understand what they do with their stress and how they act it out, right? And how we experience it. So that's one thing to talk about in the family system is like how people are doing their stress. And even if kids are calmer, they're still worrying, just even like parallel worrying with their parents, right? And that parents need to also think about putting themselves in their kids' shoes, right? What is this child going to be picking up from me or the world or media? Because you can't really stop the media flow from coming into the family, but you can maybe have nights or maybe even short family meetings where you can talk about worries, like what are people worrying about? And let's demystify some of the worries. I know that with some of my kids, they're depressed, like, and can't get out of bed because they're thinking about what world am I walking into? And these might be the more preteen adolescent kids. And then we also have to think about like, how do we keep hope alive, with our kids and with ourselves about the world? When I see my co-parents, the people that live in 2 different homes trying to navigate this, there's other worries that are coming in, which is like the interpretation of social distancing might be really different for one parent versus the other, or cleanliness, or the amount of times you wash your hands or wash your counters off, or, all the little things that we're not thinking about. Like we're starting to have to really hone into how we interact with the world. And then, how we interact in our own homes around our own hygiene, right? So parents who are transitioning their kids back and forth are increasing the exposure time. So people are really getting conservative around that and having longer distance between their visits with their kids, which means parents have to be super creative about how they're going to stay connected, which is where screen time actually helps, because you could use a lot of the same thing that we were talking about: dance parties, doing art, reading books, playing video games with your kids, actually sharing a screen and helping them with their homework. There could be lots of things that you do if you're the parent that's not with your kids. And then really talking with your other parent about how they are interpreting all the things that we're being told that we should do to protect ourselves and our kids, and making sure that that interpretation is aligned. And if it's not aligned, really maybe reaching out to a professional to have a conversation about what some of the baseline rules are going to be about how both families really collaborate around what they need to do to keep their families and their kids safe. Are you seeing some of that too, that people are really needing help interpreting what
Yeah.
to?
Yeah, for sure. And I find that with our co-parenting families, when the parents aren't aligned, it's actually making the child really anxious. And so they'll go to one house and the parent will be like, oh, let's go, outside for a walk. And the kid says, no, we're not allowed to. We're going to get sick. We might die. Right. And that's scarier for that little kid, kind of torn between these two sides.
Mm-hmm. So this is exactly why we're doing this talk, is to really get parents to think about what their kids might be going through and what they can do to help. And whether you're in a family of a single parenting family, or a double parenting family, or a co-parenting family, some of these discussions still have to be had, because we all are reacting to this very differently, and our kids are picking it up. So that's really, really important to remember.
And with that, I realized the piece I wanted to say, around the kids having anxiety, is just the concept of overall regression. And so anytime any of us, kids or adults, are faced with a crisis or something new that overwhelms our coping skills, we can regress. So with kiddos, I'm seeing a regression in some of their behaviors. And the way regression works is it's usually the most recent skills that you've learned start going backwards. And so I'm actually seeing this with kids and adults. And so, like, let's say if you're a parent and you recently just kind of learned to manage your anger, you might find yourself more angry. Or if your kid was recently potty trained, you might see more accidents happening. Mm-hmm. And so just kind of knowing, like, developmentally what's happening for yourself and your kid can make it all just easier.
Right. And so, you can be easier on yourself too. Like, oh, I'm regressing. I'm going back to some of these bad habits. And so again, I want to emphasize the thing about love and structure, right? Love is also having compassion for what everybody's going through. And structure is just keeping structure in place, because structure actually helps us function better, right? So even if we are having depression or anger or stress or regression, if we know what we're supposed to be doing that day, then we have like a safety net, right? We can still keep operating as best we can, right? So another thought is, like, we're also seeing that families are in the households all together, and how can people do that well, respecting space, dealing with each other's tension, and all the demands that each party has: kids with schoolwork, parents with maybe work, or just managing the household and managing all their worries, their adult worries. Like, how are you seeing people doing that, or how are you coaching people to work on that?
Yeah, and so I'm actually finding it's a little more trickier with individuals who have less space. And so sometimes my co-parenting families, right, at least one of the people may have just a one-bedroom place, which makes it much more tricky. And so I have asked families to designate areas that someone can go for some alone time, and to have rules and expectations around it. So if your kiddo needs some time by themselves and says, I want half an hour, really leave them alone for that half an hour and let them have that space. And then conversely, as the adult, modeling taking some time for yourself. Because if we don't model the coping skills for our children, they're not going to learn it. Mm-hmm. And so just modeling this for kiddos is what I've been telling parents is really, really important. And if anyone has a backyard, that's a great place to go to have some space. And what wasn't mentioned earlier, just the concept of exercise. Like, go on a walk outside with your kids if you're comfortable. Make sure you have your mask on, but remember, nature's there and it can be helpful too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And also just part of the love and structure thing, again, is that alone time could be put on the schedule, right? That everyone has a certain amount of alone time every day, or parallel alone time. Like sometimes the space might be too small, or kids are a little insecure and young, so they can't really separate from the parent and be far away, but they could have their own space, their own little designated spot. And maybe with kids, you can designate that with a fort, right? They go into their fort, their blanket fort. But maybe it's also that everybody in the family has their corner, has their little space that has their stuff in it, that they can chill out and relax. And maybe during those times, screens are off, maybe music is on, maybe there's something else like using the senses that helps, like candles or incense, or something different is added to the environment, so that people are like, okay, this is also our relaxing cue, right? Because all of a sudden lights are dim, or we're going to open all the windows or something like that, so that we have a difference in the environment. So changing it up. And I agree with you about nature, because that's kind of going back to like smelling the roses, right? We can get some time in nature to just see what's out there and really investigate and tend to details, like be more present with what's going on in our neighborhoods. Like I notice in my neighborhood, the birds are singing louder than ever before. And so I'm actually trying to learn like different birds and different bird sounds. And I've never have ever spent time trying to do that before. So it's kind of an interesting way to add something else to your world that you never have added before.
Yeah, and Susan, I think really the overall piece is have fun, be creative. I find that's what helps everyone get through this. It's like the nature piece. Can we go in the backyard and find 5 different caterpillars, right? Let's do competing forts. Okay, you create one in your bedroom, I'm going to create mine. And let's go look at our different forts. Let's take 5 ingredients each and try to make a cupcake and see how each of our cupcakes come out. I mean, really, there are so many really amazing creative things that you can do with your children. And so my biggest recommendation is to not have power struggles with your kids. So many parents are afraid that, you know, kids' education is going to slip. They're on screen time so much. But really, in the end, kids will catch up with their learning, and a little extra screen time is going to be okay. And so the biggest thing is be flexible and bond with your child, because we don't ever get this chance to be with our kids for so long when it's not like the summertime. And so really use this as a beautiful moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's important. Like, of course, we're not trying to minimize that it's a scary time, that it's a stressful time for everyone, and that we're all being forced to change. But there's 2 ways to go through a stressful time, right? Being super stressed and like that was the worst time is looking back on it, or hey, you know, we actually, there was some silver linings in that time. There was some ways that we actually got to know each other differently and spend different kinds of time together. So that's my hope for the people that are listening to this discussion that we're having, is that you'll find things in our discussion that help you find ways of spending different time with your kids and yourself and with your co-parent, so that you're not in the same struggles. Your struggles might be different, but that you're finding some creative ways to get through them. But anything else that you want to say and in closing up this talk, any other pointers or any other tips that you really want to emphasize to people?
Yeah, that was my main thing, was just to have fun and engage with your kid, because that's actually just the most powerful piece.
So don't miss those moments to engage. Like this could be one of the things that we get out of this, is like engaging with people differently, engaging with our families differently.
Being mindful in the moment of what we have now.
So both of us are here, and we're going to leave you links on how to reach out. You didn't mention your workbook though in the beginning, so maybe you could talk about that at the end and we'll leave a link for that for folks.
Oh, right. Yeah. So it's supposed to come out at the end of May, and it's an activity book for kids 5 to 8. But as a side note, I've been using it in my practice with kids and adults, and it works really well. But it's 50+ activities around how to create insight around your anger and skills to help you move through it.
So I'm so happy to hear about your workbook. I'm looking forward to taking a look at it myself, and I hope other parents will do the same. And I also wanted to offer co-parents a workshop that I'm running. The link is below. It's a 4-week online workshop just to talk about different things that come up in co-parenting, especially around the pandemic, that you might want to join our discussions in and learn a little bit of new informations and the way to think about things differently during this time. So feel free to click on that. Email me if you have any questions. And so again, you'll see all of our information and links below. Don't hesitate to reach out. We know it's a challenging time and we want to be there for you. Okay. Thanks so much again for coming on and talking to me about some of these issues. I love your office. I love the house there. I think that's a really good symbol of our talk, is just that house, the family, however your family is.
And Susan, thank you for having me on here. I love working with you. So it's lovely to have done this.
Great. Well, hopefully we'll do it again. Okay. Bye for now.
Bye.